Like many teams, the Orioles have been active this week as the offseason officially begins. And really within the last day or so, they have added 3 new players to their 40-man roster. So let's learn more about Rene Pinto, Thaddeus Ward, and Luis Gonzalez coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, November 6th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to give you the scouting report for the 3 newest Orioles who have been added to the 40-man roster. Right-handed pitcher Thaddius Ward, who was claimed off waivers from the Washington Nationals, catcher Rene Pinto, claimed off waivers from the Tampa Bay Rays, and left-handed pitcher Luis Gonzalez, who was in AAA with the O's this year, but has been added to the 40-man roster. We'll break down the games of all 3 of those guys and how they each could help the Orioles in 2025. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So the biggest news of this week so far, specifically on Monday, as the deadline came at Monday at 5 p.m. to get those qualifying offers in and decide on those options on your players, was the fact that the Orioles actually surprisingly declined the $4 million option for Danny Coulombe and made him a free agent this offseason. Now, if you're still perplexed about that move, make sure to listen to Tuesday's episode of the podcast. Kind of broke down why I think the Orioles may have done it and why I think we may be hearing some more injury news about Danny Coulombe in the coming days to kind of explain more about why the O's made that move. But make sure to check out that episode. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page and leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever. It really helps out the pod. But there were other roster moves that the Orioles made on Monday, ones that we weren't able to get to on Tuesday's episode because the Danny Coulombe decision was the big one. But wanted to break them down here on a Wednesday. Let's start with the first waiver claim of the day, as the Orioles claimed 27-year-old right-handed pitcher Thaddeus Ward off waivers from the Washington Nationals. Now, Ward will turn 28 in January, so next year will be his age 28 season. And he spent the entire 2024 season on the Nationals 40-man roster, but he was in AAA for the entire year. And that is kind of where we begin with Thaddeus Ward. He's kind of an interesting player here because he was a Rule 5 selection. So that does some weird things to kind of where he has been roster-wise throughout his career. So after the 2022 season, he was in the Red Sox system, a 5th-round pick of the Red Sox back in 2018 out of UCF, had some good numbers coming through the Red Sox minor league system, had a really good year in 2022 in AA as he moved up there. And many thought the Red Sox would then add him to the 40-man roster that offseason. You know, he wouldn't be a big leaguer yet. He'd probably move up to AAA, but they thought there's no way they let him go unprotected. Well, they did. And with the very first pick in the Rule 5 draft in December of 2022, the Nationals took the right-hander Thaddeus Ward from the Red Sox. Now, to keep a player like that in your organization, as we know from the Orioles getting many players from the Rule 5 draft, most importantly, Anthony Santander, you got to keep that player on your major league roster for the entirety of the following season. And it kind of worked out for the Nationals because they were a terrible team in 2023. So they had a chance to really keep a guy like Ward around on their roster, despite the fact that he was not amazing. So the Nationals put him on the big league roster in 2023, and they tried to hide him really as best they could that year. And he didn't pitch a lot. He was mostly in mop-up duty, but in 26 appearances, he threw 35 1/3 innings for the Nats at the big league level in 2023, posted a 6.37 ERA with a 6.68 FIP. He had a strikeout rate of about 19%. He also had a walk rate of about 18%. Yeah, in 35 1/3 innings, he struck out 30 and walked 28. That is not something you want to see, but when you really think about it, This was a guy who had never pitched above AA. And remember, the previous year in AA with the Red Sox, he had thrown just 33 innings after getting 8 innings in AA in 2021. So, I mean, he had 9 AA starts and then was sent to the majors. You can't expect a guy to do a lot of good stuff with that. He was mostly pitching in mop-up situations. It was basically a way for the Nationals to hide him on the roster the best they could throughout the season. And then once you get him through one full season on the big league roster, Ward then becomes officially a part of the Nationals organization, and you can freely send him back down to the minor leagues. And that is what the Nationals did. They sent him down to AAA while he was still holding a 40-man roster spot, but to finally pitch in AAA for the first time in 2024. And when he was in the big leagues in 23, he was mostly sinker, sweeper, and cutter. I mean, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page right now, you can see the Thaddeus Ward pitch mix in the big leagues in 2023, this courtesy of StatCast and Baseball Savant. As you can see, very heavy sinker and sweeper. He threw the cutter a good amount. And then there was a four-seamer and a changeup he would use very occasionally. You know, it was a 93 mile per hour fastball, cutter at 88, sweeper at 81. That was kind of the mix for the right-hander. And again, he was trying to find things, always had an okay fastball and a really good sweeping slider in the minor leagues, but he was clearly just not ready for the big leagues, and that happens a lot for Rule 5 picks, but the Nats saw enough in him to still keep him on the roster. It helps when you're a bad team, and hold him in the organization. So they send him back down to AAA, and he had always been a starter since he was drafted throughout the minor leagues. He was not going to be used as a starter in this odd Rule 5 situation, but they put him right back in the AAA rotation in 2024. And things, well, they didn't go super well. He did stay fairly healthy, which is a good thing. He made 28 starts. He threw about 120 innings in AAA for the Nationals. That is a good sign. The bad sign was he had a 5.64 ERA and a 5.93 FIP. And despite a strikeout rate of 19%, it's like not amazing, but not terrible. He had a 17% walk rate. That is more than double, the big league average walk rate for a pitcher. That is not good. Very similar to what he did in the big leagues in 23. Ward went out there in AAA in 2024. Yeah, he struck out 107 batters, but he walked 94 batters and he hit 15 batters on top of it. So if you include the hit by pitches, it was an even split, 107 strikeouts and 107 free passes for him at the AAA level. Command clearly is still an issue for the right-hander, but the stuff is there. He approached things a little bit differently in AAA this year with the Nationals. He ended up throwing a lot more cutters in AAA, and he added back his curveball. It was a pitch he threw in the minors with the Red Sox, didn't throw in the big leagues with the Nats last year, but then brought it back in AAA this season. And again, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, here you'll now see that pitch mix in AAA this year for Thaddeus Ward in 2024 with the Nationals. And again, it was basically more of a 3-pitch even split between the cutter, the sinker, and the sweeper, but his cutter usage went up from 20 to 29%. It turned into his number one pitch and really was his go-to pitch to get out. So he threw it against righties. He threw it a lot against lefties to get them out as well. Had a swing and miss rate right around 30%, and he really upped the velocity on that cutter. It looked a little bit more like a slider in 2023 when he was throwing it at 87. And that might have been one of the issues with it because he has his really good sweeper that he throws at 81, 82. But the cutter at 87 just didn't have enough of a difference between that and the sweeper to be effective. Well, he turned the cutter more into a true cut fastball. He upped it to about 90 miles per hour. He'd be up to 91 plus at times with that cutter. And that allowed it to look different than his sweeper, which was like 81, 82 this season. And that allowed both pitches to get better. The sweeper had a good swing and miss. Opponents hit just 191 against it this year. Now, the sinker was hit at an over 300 average, and that's not great. The four-seamer was hit around 2, but he also threw more changeups. As I mentioned, he added back in the curveball. He was trying some different things to pull together that pitch mix a little bit. And the thing that really intrigues you in Thaddeus Ward, especially if the Orioles have the plans to make him a reliever at the big league level, again, he's mostly been a starter in the minor leagues, is what his sweeper did against right-handers this year. He threw a sweeper a lot against lefties, which you don't see a lot of guys do with that sweeping slider that has a regular slider has, some right to left movement, but also has some downward movement. The sweeper goes more right to left and less downward. So it basically sweeps straight across the strike zone instead of having more downward movement. those pitches generally are better for a lefty swing path when they come from a righty. But something about Ward's sweeper made it good against lefties as well. But against righties, it was almost unhittable this year. Like, he threw that sweeper, and listen, it did have a 36% swing and miss rate against righties in the big leagues in 2023, and that is certainly something to look at for a guy who wasn't ready for the majors clearly. But against right-handers, he threw his sweeper in AAA this year more than any other offering. Usually you're going to see guys at least throw more fastballs. No. He went sweeper. Right-handed hitters hit 182 with a 38% swing and miss rate and just a 14% hard hit rate against Ward's sweeper in AAA this year. Those are elite pitch numbers for that offering. And yeah, his fastball still got hit hard. He did get a lot of ground balls with his sinker, but they still got hit hard. His four-seamer got bludgeoned at times. The changeup was a little bit better, which was nice. But overall, what that sweeper data shows you is that, yeah, maybe the Orioles could still try him out as a starter in AAA again in 2025, but the Orioles are going after Thaddeus Ward because they think they could tweak him a bit and turn him into a good big league reliever next year. That is why they are claiming a guy like this on waivers. I mean, he did have really good prospect status pre-2021, but then we had the pandemic in 2020. Ward gets Tommy John surgery in 2021, doesn't return to the minors until the middle of the 22 season, and that's why he only threw like 30 innings in AA that year, because he was coming back from Tommy John. And Eric Longenhagen at Fangraphs had a write-up on him last year where he said he basically thinks he's going to be a reliever long-term who can do a better job of developing that changeup, which he was doing in AAA with the Nats last year, and can at least get righties out and maybe be a multi-inning guy. And the best part is he has option years remaining. He has 2 of them. So the Orioles can get him on the 40-man. They can bring him into spring training in Sarasota. And there's not a great chance he makes the team on opening day, but he's got options. So you can just send him to AAA Norfolk and you can decide, hey, do we want to still use him as a starter to be depth, or do we want to turn him into a full-time reliever in Norfolk next year and really work on what we want to work on with Ward? Whatever they saw, probably something with the sweeper and the changeup that made the Orioles claim him on waivers, and basically say, hey, this is your new role. Give you the first half of the season in AAA to figure it out, and then maybe you can be a part of our bullpen in the second half of next year. I think what the Orioles are going to do, kind of turn him into a cutter slider reliever who's just nasty against righties, and get the changeup to be just good enough where he can get lefties out when you need him to. And then you just got to figure out which fastball is better. He throws a sinker and a four-seamer. They're both not great. Just find whichever one feels better, stick to that one, and have him play off the sweeper as his number 1 pitch, and then go to the fastball if he needs a strike or something like that, just to keep hitters guessing. But again, this is not going to be the Orioles setup man next year, but the look for Thaddeus Ward is a little bit different, because Luke Weaver was once a top pitching prospect. Thaddeus Ward was more like a good prospect in the Red Sox system, not like a top prospect around Major League Baseball. But Luke Weaver was having some similar struggles until he just figured out the right pitch mix. But he had a good sweeper and he had a changeup in there. The Yankees figured it out. I'm not saying Thaddeus Ward is going to be the Orioles' Luke Weaver, but there's some of the skills in there and some of the background in there where maybe they see something like that. And that is why they went after this guy to bring him into the system. And, there's always a chance the O's try and sneak him through waivers this offseason as well and keep him in the organization. But either way, they certainly like something there to bring him in. Now, the other waiver claim that they made was a little bit different, because this one was for more of a need on the roster right now, as Rene Pinto, the catcher, claimed off waivers from the Rays. Tell you why the Orioles brought him in coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So for the Orioles, they brought in the right-hander Thaddeus Ward on waivers, and also on Monday, they brought in the catcher Rene Pinto, claiming him off waivers from the Tampa Bay Rays. Pinto, very similar in age, also a 28-year-old. He a bat-first catcher who, unlike Ward, who has options, is out of minor league options. So if we get to the point next year where Pinto does not make the Orioles opening day roster, he would have to be DFA'd and cannot just be optioned directly down to AAA. Now, Pinto has a little more major league time than Thaddeus Ward does. Ward was kind of forced into being in the major leagues in 2023 and then was sent right back down to AAA. Pinto has spent some time in the big leagues in each of the last 3 seasons with the Tampa Bay Rays. Basically, since 2022, Pinto has been the Rays' number 3 catcher. So when they've had an injury to their number 1 guy or their number 2 guy, whether it's been the Christian Bethancourts, the Mike Zaninos, the Francisco Mejias, the Ben Rortvests of the world, whomever they've got in there, that rotating tandem of catchers the Rays have had. Rene Pinto has been a part of that mix over the past 3 seasons. He played in 25 games in 2022, 39 games in 2023, and then 19 games in 2024 at the big league level with the Rays. Overall in 3 seasons, 83 games, 203 plate appearances, hit .231 for an 87 WRC+. Now I say bat first catcher because that's what he was, at least in the minor leagues, when he was coming up through the Tampa Bay Rays system. He had a really good year back in 2021 where he hit 20 home runs and hit the ball really well between AA and AAA. That was when he first got to AAA. I mean, he came up to AAA, hit .299 with a 125 WRC+ in 12 bombs in just like 50 games to end the year in AAA Durham. Like, Pinto looked like maybe the Rays catcher of the future heading into 2022. He didn't quite have the starting job yet, but he put together another really good full season at AAA in 2022, got some time in the big leagues, and the Rays were like, maybe he's our starting catcher next year. But then he started to go the other way. The bat started to fall off, and he was just not producing when he would get that chance at the big league level. And it's unfair to ask a guy when he's coming up who's serving as your backup catcher to really come through with the offense. But this is a guy with some pop in his bat, and it just hasn't really translated. In the big leagues last year, 19 games, 49 plate appearances. He had a 106 WRC+. He hit .214, .292 on base, .429 slug, had a couple of home runs, had an 8% walk rate, also had a 37% strikeout rate. The most concerning thing about Pinto is in his big league career, again, 237 plate appearances, he struck out 37% of the time. If qualified, that would be the highest strikeout percentage in Major League Baseball. And he's only walked 3.4% of the time. That is not a great combo for a hitter to barely be walking and to be striking out more than 1/3 of the times that you come to the plate. Usually doesn't end up with very good statistics. The only way, again, it was 50 plate appearances, but the only reason he's been able to be even close to a big league average hitter when he's been there is that he does have some power in his bat. He does have 10 major league home runs in 83 games out there, and that has allowed him to stay in that Rays org and continue to get those chances as their number 3 catcher. Now, he made the Rays opening day roster last year for the first time as their backup catcher, but didn't perform super well, was sent down on May 3rd, had 3 IL stints in AAA, and never returned to the big leagues after May in 2024. Spent the rest of the year in AAA, and that's where it got concerning. Now, some of this could have been the multiple injuries, but his bat just vanished in AAA last year. He still hit 11 home runs, but he hit just 191, crazy high strikeout rates again. He had a 59 WRC+ in Durham last year. And again, that was bouncing through a multitude of injuries. It was only 230 plate appearances. But like the bat that he had, at least in the minor leagues going, that kind of disappeared last year as well. And that is why the Rays felt comfortable DFAing him and placing him on waivers this offseason. Now, he just turned 28 a couple days ago, right-handed batter behind the plate, a guy who, isn't even in arbitration yet, but because he's been so up and down so far, has already exhausted all 3 of his option years, so he is out of options. But when he does get to the big leagues, he does show off some data that he was showing off in the minor leagues with the Rays that allowed him to be kind of called a quote-unquote bat-first catcher. Again, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you can look at the Rene Pinto Baseball Savant page from here in 2024. Now, again, he was not qualified for anything because he had 49 big league plate appearances. So a gigantic banner should say small sample size theater right now. But when he did put the ball in play, and again, didn't happen a lot because with 49 plate appearances at the big league level, he struck out in 18 of them and walked in 4 of them and was hit by a pitch in another one. So you take out 23 of those, and there's only 26 times where he has put the ball in play. But when he did, and again, a gigantic but right here with the small sample size, 93.7 mile per hour average exit velocity, 19.2% barrel rate, and a 61.5% hard hit rate would have led Major League Baseball. Again, we're talking about 50 plate appearances, not 600. But those are elite numbers. He's got incredible bat speed. He's up near 75 miles an hour on the average bat speed there. Like, when he can find a way to make contact, it is fun to watch. Like, the offensive profile, it kind of reminds you of another Rays catcher or former Rays catcher in Mike Zunino, where he had this crazy strikeout problem. Like, he would strike out almost 40% of the time, but when he made contact, it was quality, hard, loud, doing damage contact when he did it. And on a much smaller scale, that's kind of been who Pinto has been. The only issue is Zunino at times would give you a little more defensively behind the plate than Rene Pinto. And that's something you're looking for, especially when the Orioles are claiming this guy to put him in the mix for their backup catcher job for Adley Rutschman heading into next year. James McCann is now a free agent. We do not know whether or not the Orioles will bring him back. They also have Blake Hunt, the catcher on the 40-man roster, who came back in the Mike Baumann trade and spent the rest of the year in AAA Norfolk last year. He is certainly an option. David Banuelos is back on a minor league deal. He is an option. But throw Rene Pinto, who's got, the most big league time out of all of them, into the mix now and has been a number 3 catcher in the past. Now, it's harder to be a number 3 catcher when you're out of options, but he is here to compete for that job. And even in AAA in 2023, like, he had a 50% hard hit rate and a 14% barrel rate. Like, those are elite numbers putting bat to ball. Now, the defense, he's like an okay blocker. He's an okay framer. He's got a really good arm. His pop time has been elite at times, so that's nice to have. He's got one really good skill back there. But what's going to happen with Pinto is the Orioles see him as a guy who can compete again for their backup catcher spot, even if they sign a veteran to a small deal to come in to be the backup catcher. Like, Rene Pinto could be your third catcher in AAA. He could be someone who could still win that job. And he's got something in that bat there. There's something there. If he can cut down the strikeouts at all, there is something in that bat. But what the O's are going to do is they're going to probably try to sneak him back through waivers at some point this offseason, hope that he clears waivers. Because he has not cleared waivers before, he would have to accept that outright assignment to AAA Norfolk. The Orioles would bring him to big league spring training as a non-roster invitee. He would try to make the team. If he doesn't make it as the backup catcher, they send him to AAA Norfolk, and basically it'll be him and Samuel Basayo working down there in AAA, and maybe we'll have a chance, if there's injuries or whatever, to come up and be the Orioles backup catcher at some point. But there's also the chance that he unlocks that offensive ability where he can cut the strikeouts a little bit, and he's a legitimate contender if he sticks around to be the Orioles backup catcher in 2025. If you made me say right now, okay, between these two guys they claimed on waivers, Thaddeus Ward and Rene Pinto, who makes the bigger impact for the Orioles, the big league level in 2025, I would lean Pinto, because Ward could just get lost in the shuffle and just stay in AAA all year as a reliever. Pinto could be one little back tweak, little injury away from being the backup catcher, and I think he has a better chance to pop than Ward does to be helpful for this team, especially because he has more big league time. So look out for him, a kind of a sneaky ad here that could be in play for that backup catcher role. But the Orioles added one more player to that 40-man roster, a guy who was already in the organization, but kind of a surprise ad. We'll tell you about left-hander Luis Gonzalez to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by HIMSHims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Well, through HIMSHims, you can get personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. That's right, HIMSHims, they are absolutely changing men's healthcare. If you don't want to really go to a doctor's office to talk about these things, that is where HIMSHims comes into play. They provide affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. The process is 100% online. They've got hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending like $2,000 or more for an Elly De La Cruz rookie card just really isn't in the cards. I like collecting, but that's some serious money to drop. Well, thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Every card that's listed is hit from last week's Arena Club slab pack drop. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and a clear hit rate for every single one. The Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. And the grading process at Arena Club, accurate, fast, and transparent. And right now you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb and using the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's arenaclub.com/lockedonmlb. Code LOCKEDONMLB for 10% off your first purchase. So to finish things off here on a Wednesday episode, we talk about the final player this week, at least so far, that the Orioles have added to their 40-man roster, and that is left-handed pitcher Luis Gonzalez. Now, he was not a waiver claim. He was a guy who spent this entire season in the AAA Norfolk Tides bullpen. He was not on the 40-man roster. He was signed to a minor league deal last October, a minor league deal for 2024, and he had a good year in AAA. The Orioles just never added him to the big league roster, but he was going to either A, become a minor league free agent again, or B, even if the Orioles re-signed him to a minor league deal, he was going to be available to other teams in the Rule 5 draft coming up in about a month if the Orioles did not add him to the 40-man roster. And they decided they want to keep him around. They don't want other teams sniffing around. And so they have added Luis Gonzalez to the 40-man roster to keep him around for next year and beyond and protect him from the Rule 5 draft. And kind of a surprising decision. You know, the deadline to add players to the 40-man is November 19th, so less than 2 weeks away. And I've been talking about it this offseason. I figured pitching prospect Brandon Young would really be the only guy who was eligible who the Orioles would add. But in a surprise move here, kind of similar to when the Orioles added Logan Gillespie to the 40-man a couple of off seasons ago, and he was okay for a bit in the majors, but obviously didn't work out and is with, I believe, the Padres organization now in AAA. Gonzalez, another bit of a surprise add. The Orioles think there's something here that can pop in their big league bullpen. Now, Gonzalez, a really interesting story. He was actually originally in the Orioles system. They signed him to a minor league deal in 2013. He spent the next 7 years through 2019 in the O's system, made it up to AAA in 2018 and 2019, but never made it to the big leagues. And Eric Longenhagen had a write-up about Gonzalez back in January of 2019, so just after Mike Elias had taken over. And he said, quote, Gonzalez 27 also has 55 fastball slider combination, and we're not sure why Baltimore hasn't pushed him to the big leagues yet. And honestly, I kind of get it. Now, his ERAs in 2018 and 2019 in AAA Norfolk weren't amazing, but think about how bad the 2018 and 2019 Baltimore Orioles were. You have a 27-year-old left-handed reliever with good stuff who's been in AAA for a year and change. Why are you not calling that guy up and at least giving him a shot to pitch a little bit in the majors on those terrible teams? Not really sure why. Some of it was Dan Duquette in 2018. Some of it was Mike Elias in 2019. But otherwise, the O's let him walk. He went and pitched in Japan in 2020. He was signed by the Giants, but stayed in AAA all year in 2021. Then he went to the Italian League. Yes, he pitched in Italy in Serie A, baseball edition, in 2022. Then pitched in the Mexican League and pitched well in 2023 before the Orioles came calling again and signed him to that minor league deal last October. What a journey it was. And he was really good in AAA last year. 60 innings for the Norfolk Tides, 4.50 ERA, 29% strikeout rate is great. 5% walk rate is super low for a hard-throwing left-hander. And it's mostly a four-seam fastball slider combination. Again, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you can see the Luis Gonzalez pitch mix from this year in AAA Norfolk, courtesy of StatCast and Baseball Savant. And again, 48% four-seamer, 37% slider, and then 12% changeup. And he threw in a sinker a couple times there, and they have him throwing one curveball on the year. But it's really four-seam slider, and that four-seam fastball, it's got some of that rising effect where, it doesn't drop as much. So it seems like it's rising to hitters. And although he throws that pitch, like it's 92 to 93 velocity wise, 30% swing and miss rate, 194 batting average against that pitch because nobody can pick it up. Then you add in a slider that gets solid swing and miss, and then a changeup. How about this changeup that Luis Gonzalez throws? He only threw it 12% of the time this year. But opponents, and again, it was exclusively his pitch for the lefty to get righties out. I believe he did not throw a single changeup to a left-handed hitter in AAA this year. It was only his way to get righties out. But when he threw it, and you could tell he probably had some command issues with it, and that's why he was only throwing it 12% of the time. But when he did throw it, opponents hit 148 with a 48% whiff rate and an 11% hard hit rate against Gonzalez's changeup in AAA. Those are absurd pitch metrics against a pitch that you're only throwing 12% of the time. The Orioles clearly see, okay, this is a guy with a good slider at 84, good rising fastball at 93, and an elite changeup that he's kind of struggling to command at 84 miles an hour. The Orioles are looking at it like this. If we can unlock that command of Gonzalez's changeup and take it to the next level, we've got a good big league left-handed reliever here. And the timing is kind of interesting. Now, it was surprising at times that the Orioles didn't give Luis Gonzalez a shot this year, especially for as long as Danny Coulomb was out and the Orioles were kind of down a left-handed reliever in that bullpen. It was definitely surprising they never added Gonzalez to the roster. But the timing is so interesting because with Danny Coulomb potentially gone, we talked about it, the Orioles declining his option. Again, check out yesterday's episode for kind of the full breakdown of that. Maybe the O's are looking for a different left-handed reliever to add to this bullpen. And look at that, on the same day, they kind of out of nowhere add Luis Gonzalez to this 40-man roster. And now, he's going to be a guy with options. So if he doesn't make the team, the O's can send him back to AAA and know that he's going to be an easier option to bring back up to the big leagues. But that changeup is kind of absurd. And that fastball has good data on it. I am very, very intrigued by Luis Gonzalez. Again, might not work out. But at this point, it's worth taking a chance on this guy. And I got to tell you, I'm pretty much going to guarantee we're going to see him pitch in the big leagues for the Orioles next year. Now, who knows what the impact will be, but if they're going out of their way to add this guy to the 40-man roster now, he is going to pitch, barring injury. He is going to pitch for the Orioles next year. Let's see if the O's have found something in the second time around for Luis Gonzalez with the Orioles. And so the O's made all those moves and a bunch of things happening on the 40-man roster. All the free agents are officially now off that roster. So you're talking Slater and Jimenez and McCann and Santander and Burns, and now Danny Coulomb is off that 40-man again. The Orioles officially activated their 4 players from the 60-day injured list back to the 40-man roster. When you go on the 60-day IL, you don't count against the 40-man, but as soon as this offseason starts, you have to be placed back on that 40-man roster. So that is Felix Bautista, Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, and Jorge Mateo are back on the 40-man roster. And then the O's also slipped Matt Bowman off their 40-man roster. He cleared waivers. He has elected free agency. Wouldn't be surprised if the Orioles try to bring Bowman back on a minor league deal this offseason after he pitched some solid innings for the Orioles out of the bullpen down the stretch. But with all of those moves, the Orioles 40-man roster currently sits at 37. So there are 3 open spots. As I mentioned, Brandon Young is going to be added to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. So that puts you at 38 with 2 open spots. And there's 2 pretty, I think, easy names. Levon Soto and Emmanuel Rivera are still on that 40-man. They could easily be taken off. They could still slip Rene Pinto back through waivers to clear a spot. Brian Baker still sitting on this 40-man. There is plenty of room still. Not a crazy amount of room, but a good amount of room to be made as the Orioles hopefully start to add some players this offseason. But that'll do it for today's episode. Hope you learned a lot more about the 3 newest Orioles on the 40-man. Thaddius Ward, Renee Pinto, and Luis Gonzalez. Let me know your thoughts on any of these guys in the comments here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. We will be back tomorrow. The news continuing to pour in on the Orioles. We got the Gold Glove Awards announced. Unfortunately, Cowser and Mountcastle did not win. We have 3 Orioles who are Silver Slugger finalists. We will talk about that. And the Orioles have made their first new hire after all of those coaching staff vacancies. Tommy Joseph is going to join the team as an assistant hitting coach next year. Tell you more about him on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.